There is a vast number of cultures throughout the world, sustained by their own languages, beliefs, traditions, behavioral norms, as well as values. There is something very unique about one culture which base all cultural aspects solely on vision. Members of this community rely greatly on their eyes. What group of people, you may ask? People of the deaf community. And today we are going to show comparisons about one of these aspects. We are going to discuss the values of the deaf culture. Let's take a look at the comparisons between people who are deaf and people who can hear. Deaf people value greatly on American Sign Language because it is their language. It's what they use to understand one another. Hearing people rely on a spoken language because that is a hearing person's means of being understood. There are physical features of the body that both deaf and hearing people use to support the understanding of their language. Deaf people express their language by the use of their hands to sign and rely on their eyes to receive information. Hearing people, on the other hand, depend on their mouth to express their spoken language and the help of their ears to receive the spoken information. Therefore, to process language, deaf people observe with their eyes, whereas hearing people listen with their ears. In other words, to reciprocate the language, deaf people watch the signing, body, and facial gestures of the other person, while hearing people listen to what the other person is saying. Declared important attributes of each culture, we can begin to understand why deaf people would adapt to the use of certain technologies. Deaf people would prefer to use the video phone, the usage of video mail, and also a visual or vibrating alerting system. In contrast, hearing people adapt to the use of a telephone, the use of a voicemail, and a sound alerting system. Okay, say there's a conference and the keynote speaker was there to discuss, bullying. And there was a deaf person there who wanted to attend this conference, but how would this person receive information? There would need to be someone there to translate this information, right? Well, this translator is known as an interpreter. Deaf people value interpreters when they entail to receive information that the speaker delivers. Another valued element for the deaf is captioning. Thank goodness for this, because now they can watch the television while waiting at the doctor's office, for example. To have a strong community entails social gatherings. So for both deaf and hearing, there are clubs, civic and social organizations where people can get together to establish or strengthen relationships and communication skills. So one of the most dominant cultural patterns in the deaf culture is collectivism. Deaf people consider themselves members of a group that include all deaf people. They consider themselves as a close-knit and interconnected group, in which they greatly enjoy being in the company of other deaf people, which I think is a beneficial thing to learn from, because in contrast, the most dominant cultural pattern in the hearing world is individualism, particularly in the United States. Most Americans have been raised to be exclusively responsible for their own lives. Lastly, deaf people value residential schools, because as a young deaf child, that is the place they attend to learn and adapt the norms of the deaf culture. It's the place where they grow and develop to become confident individuals, and it's an opportunity to surround themselves with other deaf children. Deaf kids can attend mainstream schools for free public education, which hearing people value. But for a deaf child, it isn't as beneficial, because there aren't as many deaf students they could relate to, if any at all. Mainstream schools can be a lonely and deteriorating place for a deaf child if adequate attention is not supplied. There you have it. These values are highly vital of everyday living by the deaf community and also the hearing community.